Hey everybody, welcome back to Volvara. In this episode I'll be working on some towers and finishing the coaster layouts and everything that I need to finish around it in order to actually get into the rest of the island. Now I have to be very honest, I actually found it very difficult to get to actually recording this episode, and I was really struggling to pretty much force myself to build this stuff since I've kind of lost the kind of drive that I would like to have for projects. And this is also one of the reasons why I prefer smaller projects over very large ones. Especially after a couple of episodes, I just kind of start burning out of creative ideas, and it more or less becomes a time-consuming thing and something that takes a lot of effort and time, but doesn't so much involve creativity or cool ideas for me anymore. And I feel like I might be kind of heading into that direction with Volvara, so from this point onward I'll also be kind of taking a little bit of a different path. I was originally planning to make a lot of the things on this island very unique and make it really in the detail of the building, but I feel like that's focusing much more on making this an impressive ride just based on the amount of effort and time that went into it, and I'm not really interested in that. I actually still like the premise of the ride of having a floating steampunk castle, but I think I want to go at it at a much more modular, kind of simple way. So a lot of the things that I'm building at this point, I hope to be using at future episodes as well, and just repeat scattered throughout the island to build the entire building up in a modular way, instead of making everything separately. And this is also the mindset that I went into a lot of the towers that I'm making in this episode with. So I kind of built them to be a bit more versatile than what I have so far, and definitely a lot more like templates that I can use throughout the build. So I'll be building 2 towers, I believe, in this one, and a small gazebo, and then going into finishing the rest of the island. And definitely the 2 towers are things that I might definitely just repeat throughout the island, use for different kinds of areas. I definitely do want to make sure that it's not too obvious that I'm repeating certain things, but just for the sake of saving time and not making this a project that I'm spending many hours just detailing in, because frankly I think that would be a waste of time, I'm gonna do it this way and hopefully get this thing out in a few more episodes and have it all be awesome and great, and be able to spend some time on other episodes as well, because yes, I do have to admit I've been starting too many series recently, and Volvara is the one on my mind that I want to finish the first, as this was more or less just supposed to be a side project and a small idea, much like Maros or Planet Coaster. It just turned out to be a lot more demanding than I thought it was, and it's very different as well. I find it's a fun challenge to try and make something that's floating and try and make every single thing on the build custom. But I think I underestimated how demanding it would be before I went into it. So that's something that I just wanted to note. And it's also, I guess, a bit of an experiment as to how you can work in the most efficient way, which I do have to say, and I don't think this is anything I ever talked about, but I definitely like to sprinkle some tips here and there. Something which I find is one of the most important things is actually practicing not just what to build or how to build, but also how to do so efficiently and in a way that saves a lot of time. I think something that many people struggle with, and honestly this is myself included, is a way to not just build the buildings that you want to go for, but also be able to build them as quickly as possible. And there are many ways that you can save time, like making your own custom window pieces and repeating that throughout a building, or even making a part of a building separately and then copy pasting that to make an entire building. It does often require that you have an idea of what you're going to build before you start building it, but there are many ways in which you can save time. And I also think a lot of the best projects that are often the most the most admired in a sense are also the kinds of projects where thought went not just into what the final thing would look like and how to build it, but also how to do so in an efficient manner. I think most of you will know Alien City and Return to Zero, and if you don't, you should totally watch them. Especially Return to Zero is a really great coaster, I'll put it down in the description. But one of the things which I like about it is that it seems so impressive and on such a grand scale, when a lot of the buildings are actually very, in a very smart way, copied around to make them look as if they're separate buildings, but actually they're sort of variations on the same template, or they're just placed in a different way, or it's set up in such a way that it isn't actually obvious that these things are copied around, and while to some that might be a bit of a degree of laziness, I actually think it's much more admirable than somebody who just puts a lot of time and effort into making something, because while I can definitely appreciate time and effort, anybody can just put a lot of time and effort into something, and it's not necessarily something that takes a vision or a creative idea or a concept. And this is kind of why I'm a huge fan of people being able to figure out smart ways to build not just beautiful things, but also build them quickly. And even though my original idea with Volvara was to make something truly unique and something that looks different from every perspective you're looking at it from, I think in this case I just don't want to spend as much time as I have to spend on this thing detailing it, because there's too many other things on my mind as well. YouTube series that I'm also doing at the moment, like too many series, too many collabs and stuff, so I don't want to be stuck on Volvara too much and spending a lot of time on this basically. Also, as a very quick note, my voice might not be the best right now. I'm going into a cold, which is kind of a shame, just because it means that my voice is going to be pretty crappy for recording, so if I'm not using the full extent of my voice, that's basically why. I would usually try to at least work around it a little bit, but I'm heading into a busy period right now and I'm actually recording this quite a bit ahead, at least more than I normally would. So I don't really see much of a way around this. I hope it's not too bad. Anyway, I'm building the second tower over here, which is one tower that I do kind of hope to use a little bit more in the future. It's pretty simple, but in terms of shape, how it turned out, I am definitely very happy with how it eventually became. There was a lot of experimentation with taking different pieces though and seeing what they look like, including the waffle piece, which I still believe is a great piece and I still need to use for something very constructive someday. But after I don't even know how many tries of placing different objects in there and not working out as the actual roof that I was looking for, I figured, oh well, whatever, I'm just gonna make my custom roof again, which is not very poly-friendly, but it's definitely the kind of shape that I'm looking for here. And this seems like a nice tower because it's very small and versatile, something that you can just stick to the side of other things or use on the sides of gates or use as a lot of things basically. And this is something that I do want to do a little bit more in the future. So far I also go into all of my parks separately without any of the blueprints or ideas from previous parks, but I definitely think that it's a lot more efficient to save all of the benches, all of the lights and everything that you're making as blueprints and keep them with you. And the same goes for things like roofs, things like custom dormers, pillars, whatever. It's something that I'm not doing at the moment, but definitely something with which you can save some time, and I would like to try that a bit more than I currently do. I also like the idea of having unique objects for every build, but there's sort of a way in which Planet Coaster allows you to make custom content, quote unquote, within the game itself, that I do like, and that I'm not really using as much as I possibly could to make a bit more out of it. TLDR, I guess, blueprints are amazing and they can save you a lot of time. I'm actually thinking about doing a Planet Coaster College video about that. It has been requested, but if you have any thoughts about it, it would be greatly appreciated if you could share them, because I'm still looking for what people are looking for in Planet Coaster College and what people's thoughts are on the topics that I might want to cover. Anyway, that's a completely different topic and I'm not trying to subtly promote myself here, but it's definitely something that I was actually wondering. Now the thing that I'm building here is the gazebo, and this was something which I kind of built because it's a kind of a low open decorative element on the island, and there were some spots in the island where I wanted to have some sort of building element, something to give it a bit of a touch to it, but I didn't want to have a large tower because that would block the view that I have over there, or there just isn't enough space to make something larger. So I feel like a gazebo is actually a pretty good way to go around that. It's got a pretty small footprint, it's not too tall, so you can fit it just underneath what is going to be the coaster clusterfuck, so that should be more or less fine. And it's of course also a fun way to mess around with a steampunky theme. I do have to say though, at first I was considering building a gazebo out of some of the ironwork-ish gingerbread pieces, and while it's definitely something that can work in a steampunk theme, it's not something that I felt I got to work so well that I could put it in the rest of the entire build, because even though you can definitely build great ironwork out of the gingerbread pieces, and it's actually my favorite thing to do with them, I didn't feel like it fit in much with the build that I have so far. So instead, I'm just taking the same old kind of domed roof which I have in the rest of the build to make sure that it actually fits with the towers. A small note though, which I haven't talked about, but which you've probably noticed in this video, is I did change the color scheme a little bit. I'm still experimenting with this, but up until this point, the only colors that I had were all just warm colors, anything like beige, brown, a lot of reds, but nothing else. And while I did have a little bit of blue at some point, I didn't feel like it really fit in at the time. But in this episode, I really felt like it's important to add a bit of blues and other colors outside of the color scheme which I have right now. So there's a bit of blue, green-ish dark colors that I added to some of the bottoms of pillars, the coaster supports, and some other decorations on the towers to add a bit more different colors in here. And hopefully that balances out the color scheme a little bit and makes it look a bit less boring, because definitely steampunk is very focused on the brassy colors, but having just brassy colors makes everything look way too boring and bland, and I definitely agree that the color scheme takes a bit more experimentation, but at least I hope the addition of some more coldish colors should make it a little bit better and a little bit more like it has some diversity to it. But then again, I'm actually still struggling with this myself, to be very honest, because it's quite hard to feature these kinds of colors as very subtle elements, as very small accents here and there, without making them too overbearing, because I still want to have the focus on the more steampunk-ish colors. Anyway, the dome is nearly finished at this point, and it's pretty much built in the way as I did it in the Planet Coaster College dome tutorial. I figured last minute I could maybe add some ironworks decorations onto the thing, but in the general look of the dome they just ended up looking a little bit awkward, and it doesn't really fit in with the style so far, so I just decided to leave them out and just leave the dome as a bit more of a simple thing. There's a bit of ironwork on the top though, because I didn't want to have a cupola or anything like that. Just a simple decoration as a small peak on top of the dome should more or less do, so that's what I went with. And for the sides of the dome, because it was looking very empty like that, I figured I could put a small dormer in, which doesn't make that much sense since this is a gazebo dome, but I figured in this case I wanted to go with whatever fancy look I felt like going with instead of realism per se. Now after I finished the gazebo, I wanted to get into the coaster layout, because this was something on my to-do list for quite a while, since I obviously didn't want to continue too much on the island without finishing the coaster layout and possibly giving myself very little space to make this layout in, because it's already very crammed. As you can see, the island is just a couple times bigger than the station, which is very small to be fair, and it goes over and underneath itself quite a few times. It actually goes right all the time. It's a little bit like NASCAR, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue, I hope. But it's very compact, but I wanted to have as much scenery interweaving within the area as well, and I also wanted to have an exit path and a queue path, which, while it's not necessarily going to be functional, could be functional if you start connecting an actual path to it, and at least keeps up the idea that this might somehow be a functional coaster. So there's not a lot of room to spare over here, and at the same time I wanted to make sure that there's enough scenery everywhere that it doesn't end up feeling like a coaster clusterfuck, and instead you have steampunk scenery beside the coaster the entire time. And that is basically the reason why it kind of follows this very straight layout for many of the very compact parts of the layout, because it means that I'll be able to place some walls in between these parts, have some decoration between the tracks without having to worry too much about the curves of the coaster going through everything. And hopefully it should allow for a couple of interesting things, like on the side of the station here. There should be a nice facade with the coaster passing by and the coaster station inside of the building facade. And on the side with all of these straight tracks next to each other, next to the lift hill, There should be some interesting interplay between the wooden walls, bridges, whatever is going to be placed there. And then for some of the curves that go around the island, they do a bit of a similar thing to the first curve, in that they'll be supported in mid-air and basically kind of give you this tour a little bit further away from the rest of the island. Anyway, that's just about it for today, so thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.